It had only been 3 hours since my son-in-law left on his business trip. When my granddaughter came home from school, her eyes were puffy and red from crying. She barely whispered to me, "Grandma, please take me away from here. I'm scared of my dad." When we arrived at my place, she handed me a recording. My legs gave out when I listened to it. It turns out that all this time, my son-in-law— I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it's reached. I was walking down the familiar cobblestone street, the heavy grocery basket weighing down my arm. It was only 9 a.m., and the sun was already beating down, making sweat bead on my forehead. I was heading to my daughter Elena's house, which was just 3 blocks from my own. The wooden front door creaked a little as I pushed it open. The house was quiet, with only the soft whir of the ceiling fan. My son-in-law, Hector, stood in the middle of the living room in a crisp business suit, his hair perfectly in place. His familiar black suitcase was next to the sofa, as if it were ready to go. He looked at me and gave me one of those tight, forced smiles that I never found to be genuine. "Carmen, could you look after the house and pick up Alma these next few days? I'm leaving on a business trip. I'll be a few days, for sure," he said in a hurry, his tone betraying his desire to end the conversation. I nodded, already used to this routine. Hector traveled frequently for work, and since Elena was buried in her work responsibilities, they often left Alma, my little granddaughter, alone at home. Alma was only 10 years old. She was the daughter of Elena and Diego, her first husband. By this time, she had surely left for school, as she did every morning. I asked him a few questions about what food he had left for Alma and took the opportunity to ask how Elena was doing with her work stress. But Hector only answered in single syllables, glancing at his watch. "The taxi is waiting outside. I'm leaving now," he said, dragging his suitcase with a faint scraping sound across the floor. I walked him to the door and watched the taxi disappear at the end of the street. I went back inside, closed the door, and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. The house was tidy, but I started cleaning the kitchen anyway. Breakfast plates were still piled in the sink, and a couple of Alma's t-shirts were tangled in the laundry basket. I gathered everything, put it in the wash, and opened the windows to air out the room. Around noon, I sat down to rest on the sofa with a glass of cool lemonade. The image of Alma came to mind. That little girl was my greatest joy. With her radiant smile and bright eyes, my heart felt lighter every time I picked her up from school. It was as if my own youth returned with every story she told me. But lately, I had noticed that Alma was talking less, and her smiles were growing scarcer. I told myself that maybe it was just because she was growing up, or because she hadn't gotten used to Hector yet. Whatever the reason, the girl still loved Diego, her biological father, even though he wasn't around much in her and Elena's life anymore. In the afternoon, I took my canvas tote and walked toward the elementary school. The schoolyard was a sea of people, with parents huddled together and the buzz of children sounding like a flock of sparrows. I stood in a corner, my eyes fixed on the river of kids flowing out the gate. Other children ran and jumped, showing off their grades to their parents, laughing and chatting with excitement. But I waited, and Alma didn't appear. A knot began to form in my stomach. I stood on my tiptoes, trying to see over the crowd. Finally, I saw her come out, last of all. Her heavy backpack hung from one shoulder, her head was bowed, and she walked so slowly, as if she were carrying the weight of the whole world on her back. "Alma!" I called, waving my hand. The girl flinched, looked up for a second, and then looked back down. When she got closer, I froze. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red and puffy, as if she'd been crying. Her usual innocent smile was gone, replaced by an exhausted expression, as if she was trying to hide something. My heart sank. A sharp pain shot through my chest. "Alma, what's wrong, my love? Did something happen at school?" I asked, taking her hand, my voice trembling. Alma only shook her head without saying anything. Her hand was ice cold in mine, despite the hot weather. I wanted to ask her more, but seeing the empty look in her eyes, I chose to swallow my questions. I squeezed her hand tightly and led her to the bus stop near the school. During the whole ride back, she sat pressed against me, hugging her backpack without saying a word. To everything I asked, she only nodded or shook her head, her eyes fixed on the floor of the bus. The unease inside me grew and grew like a heavy stone on my chest. The door to Elena's house closed behind us, and the click of the lock seemed to put an end to a long, distressing day. I told the girl to take off her shoes, trying to keep my voice calm, but inside, I was a nervous wreck. Alma just stood there, clutching her backpack tightly, not bothering to lift her head. I went to the kitchen, prepared a cup of hot milk, and placed it in front of her at the dining table. Steam rose from the cup, but she didn't touch it. She just sat there, her gaze lost on the floor, as if the weight of the world was on her thin shoulders. I pulled up a chair and sat next to her. I put a hand on her shoulder and spoke to her in the softest voice I could muster. "Alma, my dear, tell Grandma what happened at school. Did someone make you feel bad?" I tried to smile, hoping my familiar face would encourage her to talk, but Alma just shook her head, pressing her lips together. Her little hands clutched the backpack strap so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I wanted to insist, but seeing her red and swollen eyes, I held back. Something was very wrong. I knew it, but I didn't want to force her to talk if she wasn't ready. Suddenly, as if something inside her had broken, Alma let out a cry and burst into tears. Her sobbing was sharp, like a knife plunging into my heart. She started to tremble, her shoulders shaking, and between choked sobs, she managed to say a few broken words. "Grandma, get me out of here. I'm really scared of my dad." Her voice was barely a whisper, but every word went through my soul, leaving me cold and unsure of what to do. "Dad? You mean Hector? What are you scared of? Tell me, my love." I tried to stay calm, but my voice was already trembling, and my heart was pounding as if it would burst out of my chest. Alma shook her head frantically as tears streamed down her cheeks. "I don't want to be here anymore, Grandma. Please." She hugged me tightly, burying her face in my chest, and I felt her warm breath on my blouse. I wrapped my arms around her, patting her back, but I felt like I was drowning. Hector, the man I thought was a support for Elena, Alma's decent stepfather. I couldn't believe it, but the look of panic in Alma's eyes wasn't something a 10-year-old could fake. I soothed her. There, my love. It's okay now. Your grandma will get you out of here. Don't be scared. I'm here." But the truth was, I was scared too. Scared that what I was about to face was more than I could handle. There was no other option. I decided to take Alma to my house, 3 blocks away. I took her hand, carried her heavy backpack, and we left Elena's house. Alma walked beside me, dragging her feet, her head still down. I didn't dare ask her anything else. I just squeezed her hand, trying to give her a sense of security. When we got to my house and the old wooden door closed, I could finally breathe a little. My house is small but cozy, full of memories of the days when my husband David was still alive. I led Alma to the living room and sat her on the sofa. "Sit here, my love. Should I get you a glass of water?" I said, forcing a cheerful tone. But Alma was still hugging her backpack, unwilling to let go. I sat beside her and gently peeled her hands away. "It's okay, Alma. It's just you and me here. No one's going to hurt you." The girl hesitated. She looked me in the eye, and with trembling hands, she unzipped her backpack. From inside, she pulled out a small, old black voice recorder, one of those that looks like a cheap toy. She placed it on the coffee table. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and she whispered as if she feared someone else might hear. "Grandma, listen to this." My heart leaped. A dreadful feeling washed over me. I took the recorder with ice-cold fingers and pressed the play button. There was a hum, then a click, like a door opening, and then Hector's voice, low, controlled, with a cold tone that chilled me to the bone. "Alma, I'm home." Alma's voice on the recording sounded weak and broken. "Dad, I'm not scared." I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. Hector continued, his voice loaded with pressure like a threat. "If you tell your mom, she'll abandon you. You don't want to make your mom sad, do you? This is our secret." I heard Alma sob, a whimper so weak it tore my soul. He kept talking in a soft but fake voice that gave me goosebumps. "Be a good girl. Don't fight me. If you're a bad girl, your mom will find out about everything and you'll lose her." The next sound was the creak of a chair, and then a muffled scream from Alma, full of panic. "No, please! I don't want to!" I was trembling from head to toe. The recorder slipped from my hands and fell onto the table with a thud, but the audio continued. Hector's voice grew deeper, each word a command. "Quiet. If anyone finds out about this, everyone will hate you. They'll say you're a bad girl." The room seemed to freeze, but I couldn't hear anything else. My head was spinning, and an immense pain and rage shot through my chest, as if I were about to be torn apart from the inside. Alma burst into tears, hiding her face on the table, her shoulders shaking with every sob. "Every time no one's home, he touches me, Grandma. He always wants to touch me in places that tickle," she said in a choked voice. "I already told my mom so many times, but she doesn't believe me. She even scolded me for making things up." I ran to hug her, feeling my heart break into 1,000 pieces. "Oh, my child," I whispered, as tears streamed down my cheeks. Trembling, I turned off the recorder. I couldn't stand another second of that sound, that voice. It was like a series of stabs, one after another. "I'm so scared, Grandma. I don't want to live in that house anymore," Alma sobbed, her face buried in my chest and her hands gripping my blouse. I hugged her, comforting her, but I was trembling myself. Fear, rage, and a sense of helplessness mixed within me. Hector, the man I thought was decent, who I thought would bring happiness to Elena, turned out to be a monster. And Alma, my little granddaughter, had been enduring all of this alone in the very house that was supposed to be her safest place. I gave Alma a tissue to dry her face, trying to stay calm. "Don't be scared, my love. Your grandma is here. I won't let anyone hurt you again," I told her, even though deep down I knew that from now on, nothing would be easy. I went to the kitchen, served her a bowl of warm chicken noodle soup, and placed it in front of her. "Eat a little. You need strength to be able to talk to Grandma." But Alma just shook her head and snuggled closer to me, as if only there she felt safe. I stayed seated, holding her, watching her slowly fall asleep from exhaustion, her eyes swollen, her little hand still clinging to the recorder as if it were her final piece of evidence. I stroked her hair as tears fell silently, seeing Alma sleeping with her innocent face marked by pain. I knew that from that moment on, life for her and for me would never be calm again. Night fell, and my little house was enveloped in silence, broken only by the constant ticking of the wall clock. Alma was asleep next to me, her breathing uneven, her sleep anything but peaceful. I sat on the edge of the bed, gently stroking her silky hair. Every strand that slipped through my fingers reminded me of the days when she was a baby and would curl up in my arms asking me for a story. But now her innocent face was etched with pain, and her swollen eyes still reflected fear. My heart felt heavy, as if a rock was crushing my chest. I picked up the phone. I dialed Elena's number. My daughter. I wanted to ask her when she would be back. I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to scream at her to make her understand the pain her daughter was going through. But the phone just rang and no one answered. I sighed. I put the phone aside, and a feeling of helplessness washed over me. Elena, so busy with her work, with her big projects, with the life she believed was happy next to Hector. But she couldn't see that Alma, her own flesh and blood, was being destroyed inside that very house. Around 10 p.m., Alma woke up with a start. She looked around, disoriented, with a look of panic, as if she had just escaped a nightmare. She hugged me tightly, her little hands trembling, clutching my clothes. "Grandma, I'm scared." Her voice was hoarse and weak, as if all her energy had been drained. "If my stepfather comes back and finds out I told you, he's going to yell at me. What's he going to do to me now, Grandma?" Every word Alma spoke was like a stab in my heart. I squeezed her shoulders, trying to make my voice sound calm, even though inside I was boiling with rage and pain. "Don't worry, Alma. I'm right here. Nobody has the right to hurt you anymore, I promise." I helped Alma sit up and carefully wiped away her tears. The recorder was still there in a corner of the room, a silent and cold witness. I didn't even want to look at it, but I knew it was the only thing that proved Alma's pain wasn't made up. I found a small metal box that David, my late husband, used to keep his trinkets in. I put the recorder inside and locked it with an old rusty key. "See?" I told Alma, forcing a smile. "Your evidence is safe. No one will take it from you." Alma nodded. She looked a little less scared, but she was still clinging to me as if I were her only refuge. I took her to the kitchen and reheated the bowl of chicken soup that had been left from the afternoon. The smell was delicious, but Alma just looked at it without touching the spoon. "Eat a little, Alma," I insisted, in a soft but firm voice. "You need strength so we can keep talking." The girl hesitated. She took the spoon, but as soon as she brought it to her mouth, tears started rolling down her cheeks again and fell into the bowl. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered, her voice choked. "I didn't want to worry you, but I didn't know what else to do." A lump formed in my throat, and tears escaped my eyes as well. I wiped her face and pulled her toward me. "This isn't your fault, my love. It's me who should be apologizing. For not realizing sooner, for not protecting you sooner." I put her in an old pair of pajamas that used to be Elena's when she was a little girl, and that I still kept in the closet. She lay down next to me, in the old wooden bed where David and I had slept together for so many nights. I lulled her to sleep, softly singing a song I used to sing to Elena when she was little. Alma's breathing slowly calmed down, but I knew that this sleep wouldn't be able to soothe the nightmares she carried inside. I lay down and closed my eyes, but my mind wouldn't stop. Old memories returned like a slow-motion movie. I remembered David, my husband, who was so kind and left over a decade ago from a sudden stroke. When he was alive, this house was always full of laughter. Back then, Elena had just married Diego, a hard-working good guy who always looked at my daughter with eyes full of love. I still remember their wedding day. Elena radiant in a simple white dress, and Diego so nervous, holding her hand in front of the guests, his face as red as a first grader's. I was there, tears running down my face, not from sadness, but from happiness at seeing that my daughter had found a good man. Then Alma was born, like a ray of sunshine that brightened our family. I remember the first day I held her, so tiny, curled up in my arms, looking at me with her round eyes. From the backyard, David yelled inside, "Carmen, I'm going to make the girl a little wooden doll to play with." And he carved with such care, making beautiful little dolls, and he smiled happily, watching Alma cling to his gift. In the afternoons, Diego would come home from work, and the first thing he would do was pick up his daughter, kissing her cheeks while Elena prepared dinner. I would sit and watch them, our whole family gathered together, and my heart would feel warm, as if the sun were shining on me. Those were the happiest days, simple but complete. Everything started to fall apart when David, my husband, passed away. A sudden stroke snatched him away, leaving this little house empty like a shell. I still remember that day when the doctor called me into the emergency room and said, in a soft but cold voice, "We did everything we could, Mrs. Rodriguez." I stood there, my legs weak, watching David lying motionless in the bed. His kind face was now just a shadow. I didn't cry then, but when I got home and sat in the chair where he always sat, I broke down. The house that was once full of laughter now only had the ticking of the clock, as if it were counting the days of my solitude. Elena was also shaken by her dad's death. She tried to be strong, but I saw the empty look in her eyes every time she came into the house. Diego wasn't doing any better. He was a good, hard-working man who always wanted to give his wife and daughter a good life. But his job started to go downhill. A close friend convinced him to invest in a business that promised big profits. I remember that night when Elena and Alma were already asleep. Diego sat with me in the backyard, his face full of worry. "Mom, I don't want my wife and daughter to suffer because of me," he told me in a low but determined voice. If this business works out, I'm going to get Elena and Alma a bigger house, a life with no worries. I advised him to be careful, not to rush, that happiness wasn't found in money. But Diego was young, full of ambition, and maybe he felt the pressure to prove he was the man of the house. I couldn't blame him, but my heart was not at ease. Just a year later, everything fell apart. The business failed, and Diego lost everything. Debt surrounded him like a storm. I saw Diego change from an optimistic young man to a quiet one. He always had a heavy expression on his face. Once I found him sitting in the backyard, his gaze lost, his eyes red, holding a cigarette he wasn't smoking. Alma, who was only 4 years old then, ran to him and put a little wildflower in his hand with an innocent smile that seemed to want to console him. Diego just hugged the girl tightly without saying anything, but I saw his shoulders tremble. The debt collectors started coming to the house, knocking on the door loudly. Their shouts could be heard down the street. The neighbors started whispering, pointing at Elena whenever she passed by. I saw my daughter getting more and more exhausted, trying to carry the whole family while Diego sank into despair. One night, Diego called Elena and me into the living room. He stood there with his fists clenched and said in a trembling voice, "Elena, I don't want you and Alma to suffer because of me. I think we should get a divorce." Elena froze. She burst into tears and hugged Diego, begging him to stay. "Don't go, Diego. We'll get through this together." But Diego just shook his head, his eyes full of pain. "I don't deserve you, Elena. I don't want to drag you and Alma down with me." Alma, too young to understand, just stood in a corner watching her mom cry and her dad drag a suitcase toward the door. I was there, my heart in pieces, but I couldn't do anything. I understood Diego. I understood that for him, leaving was the only way to protect Elena and Alma from the weight of the debts. But seeing my daughter fall to the floor, hugging Alma and crying, I wanted to scream that it was all a mistake. Diego left, taking a piece of Elena's and Alma's hearts with him, and leaving a void that I knew would never be filled. After that day, the debt collectors stopped coming. Elena cut all contact with Diego and threw herself completely into her work. She worked like crazy day and night at the office, as if only work could help her forget the pain. Not long after, Elena got a raise and then a promotion. She decided to take Alma and rent an apartment far from this house, full of memories of David and me. I supported her, but I couldn't help feeling sad. I saw Alma less often. Only now and then did I pick her up to spend the weekend with me. On those occasions, I saw that Alma missed her dad, and she would ask me, "Grandma, where is my dad? Is he coming to play with me?" I could only hug her and lie, telling her that her dad was busy but would visit soon. During those years, Diego lived in silence, working tirelessly to pay off his debts. He didn't come to the house often, afraid that the collectors would show up and bother Elena and Alma. But I knew he never stopped loving Alma. Once I saw him standing on the corner a distance from Elena's house, watching the girl play in the yard. He didn't approach, he just stood there, his eyes filled with love and regret. I wanted to call out to him, to tell him to come in, but I stopped myself, afraid of complicating things even more. In the years that followed Diego's departure, I watched Elena fight to get by, like a tree trying to grow in the middle of a storm. She took refuge in her work, spending days and nights at the architectural firm, as if only blueprints and contracts could help her forget the pain of losing her father and her husband. Elena rose quickly, from being just another employee to a trusted member of the firm, in charge of important projects. I felt proud, but it also hurt to see her. She was still young, barely in her 30s, but the sparkle she used to have in her eyes was gone. I knew that Elena wasn't just building a career, but that she also longed for a new home, a place where Alma could grow up with love, and where she herself would stop feeling lonely. I kept going to her house often to look after Alma on the days she came home late. Alma, my granddaughter, was older now, but she was still a sensitive girl who loved to hug me and tell me things about school. In those moments, my heart felt light, but I couldn't help but worry. Elena was so busy that she barely had time to play with her daughter, and I was afraid that Alma felt alone in her own home. I tried to make up for it by cooking her favorite dishes, telling her stories about her grandpa David, but a lump was always in my throat. A child needs their mom and dad, and back then, Alma only had me when Elena wasn't around. And then, Hector appeared. I still remember the first time Elena told me about him. Her voice sounded excited, as if she had found a light after so many dark days. "Mom, I met him at the company party," Elena told me, her eyes shining. "Hector is a mature man, very polite, and he's great to talk to. He works in the finance department, and everyone loves him." I smiled, happy for her, but deep down, I felt a certain reservation. After all the suffering with Diego, I just wanted Elena to find someone truly good, not just for her, but for Alma too. Over time, Hector started to become a constant presence in Elena's house. Every time he came, he brought a basket of fresh fruit or a little gift for Alma, an ice cream, a doll, a coloring book. I watched as Hector spoke to Alma in a soft voice, always joking to make her laugh. Once I was visiting and found him changing a light bulb on the patio, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked up and smiled at me. "Don't worry, Mom. Leave the house repairs to me." That attitude reassured me a little. I thought maybe Elena had finally found a man who cared about her family, someone who could give her the happiness she so deserved. At first, Alma was shy around Hector. She would often hide behind me and only offer a forced smile when he gave her a gift. But in front of Elena and me, Alma seemed to be opening up little by little, or so I thought. Once I saw her eating an ice cream that Hector had bought her, sitting in a corner with a smile on her face. I told myself that it was only a matter of time for Alma to get used to her stepfather. After all, the girl still missed Diego, her real dad, a lot. The few times Diego called to ask how Alma was doing, she would tell me about it excitedly, in a cheerful voice like a little bird's. I didn't want to force her to forget Diego, but I also hoped that Hector would be a good father, even if he couldn't replace him. Elena and Hector's wedding was simple, but very warm. I remember that day. Alma was wearing a pastel pink dress and held a small bouquet of flowers, standing next to her mom in the church. She looked beautiful, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes, as if she was trying to please her mother. Elena, on the other hand, was radiant. Her smile was as bright as it had been the day she married Diego. I was sitting in one of the pews, tears rolling down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from hope. I prayed in silence, asking that this would be a new beginning for my daughter, for Alma, for our entire family. Hector, with his polite manner and confident smile, made me believe that he would bring peace to Elena and her daughter's lives. After the wedding, Hector moved into Elena's house. He acted like a hard-working man. He would take Alma to school. He often stopped by my place to say hi, and even fixed the wooden kitchen door at Elena's that always creaked. I saw him as thoughtful, attentive, and I started to think that I had worried too much. Once, Hector brought me a jar of honey, saying he had bought it in his hometown and knew I liked it. "Take good care, Mrs. Carmen," he told me in a sincere tone. I thanked him, feeling a sense of relief in my heart. Maybe, I thought, Hector really was a good man. But Elena was getting busier. She accepted more big projects, left early, and came home very late. Sometimes she would even stay at the office on weekends. Hector, for his part, started traveling a lot for work, leaving Alma home alone more frequently. I started to worry. I was afraid the girl felt lonely. One day, Elena called me. Her voice sounded exhausted. "Mom, I'm swamped with work. I can't be with Alma all the time. Could you come and look after her during the day?" I heard her voice and felt a mix of pity and sadness. "Of course, honey. Don't you worry. I'll take care of Alma," I replied without hesitation. I loved Elena, but I loved Alma more. A 10-year-old girl, no matter how strong she is, needs care and love. From that day on, a new routine was formed. Early in the morning, I would go to Elena's house. I'd make Alma breakfast and take her to school. In the afternoon, I would pick her up, make her lunch, and ask her how her day went. At night, I'd return to my house, my heart full from having been with Alma, but also heavy seeing that she talked less and less each day. There were days when I noticed that Alma was forcing a smile, and her gaze would drift away when I mentioned Hector. "Are you having fun with your stepfather?" I would ask, trying to sound casual. Alma would just shake her head and whisper, "Everything's fine, Grandma." I felt a lump in my throat, but I didn't dare to insist. I told myself that maybe she still wasn't used to Hector, especially since she still missed Diego so much. Tonight, after the truth came to light, I could barely sleep. My eyes were burning, but sleep wouldn't come. The recording of Hector's voice kept playing in my head. Every cold word, every sob from Alma was like a stab in my heart. I was lying next to my granddaughter, watching her innocent face, trapped in a restless sleep, and my soul was on a knife's edge. The next morning I tried to act normal. I took Alma to school just like any other day. The girl walked in silence, not saying a word, just squeezing my hand the whole way. I smiled at her, pretending everything was okay, but inside, I knew I was preparing for a battle. The recorder was in my old tote bag, like a ticking time bomb ready to explode. I left Alma in her classroom, watching her walk slowly, her heavy backpack making one shoulder lower than the other. "Be a good girl, my love," I said, forcing a sweet voice. Alma just nodded, her eyes still full of distress. I turned away, my heart in pieces, and promised myself that today I would confront Elena, even if it meant destroying what was left of our family. Elena didn't get home until late. I decided to stay, even though I'd normally be back at my own place by then. I sat at the dining table, clutching my tote bag, feeling a fire inside me but trying to stay calm. When Elena came in, I saw she was exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. She quickly took off her heels and tossed her purse onto the sofa. "Mom, you haven't left yet?" she asked. Her voice sounded surprised, but she couldn't hide her tiredness. I didn't answer right away. I just got up and pointed to a chair. "Sit down, Elena. I need to talk to you." Alma was sitting next to me in silence, hugging her backpack, her head bowed. I took the recorder out of my bag. I placed it on the table and with trembling fingers pressed the play button. The hum sounded, and then Hector's voice, cold and terrifying. "Alma, I'm home." Alma's voice, between sobs, answered on the recording. "Dad, I'm not scared." And then Hector's voice, threatening. "If you tell your mom, she'll abandon you. This is our secret." Every word was like a knife, not just for me. I watched as Elena froze, her eyes wide, clinging to the edge of the table. But then, as if she didn't want to believe it, Elena frowned and dismissed it with a wave of her hand. "Impossible. This is a fabrication. Alma, you hate your stepfather, so you made all this up, didn't you?" Her voice was harsh, as if she was trying to deny the truth in front of her. I looked at her, incredulous. "Elena?" I almost shouted, my voice trembling with rage. "Don't you hear it's Hector's voice? She's a 10-year-old girl. How could she make something like this up?" I pointed at the recorder with a shaking hand, feeling my blood boil. Elena's face turned red. She jumped up, and her voice became a scream. "Then you explain to me how a little girl could record something like this? Alma is always asking to go live with Diego. He must have convinced her. Diego is jealous of Hector. He's wanted to destroy this family since before I married Hector." I was shocked and asked her, "What did Diego tell you about Hector?" Furious, Elena told me that ever since Hector started spending time at the house, Diego had called her to say that a former coworker of Hector's had warned him that he wasn't a good person, that he had a shady past. "Diego is jealous because I found happiness again," Elena screamed. "He wants to ruin my family, and that's why he used Alma to do this." I contained my rage and turned to Alma. The girl was trembling, her eyes full of tears, and her little hands were gripping my arm. "I told you, Grandma," Alma sobbed, her voice choked. "I already told my mom so many times, but she never believed me." Her crying broke my heart. I hugged her tightly, feeling her little body shake in my arms. "Don't be scared, my love. "I'm right here," I whispered to her. But my eyes were still fixed on Elena, as if I wanted to burn away her blindness with my gaze. Elena jumped up, her hands trembling, and pointed at Alma. "It was definitely Diego. He's always wanted to turn her against me. He wants her to hate Hector." Her voice broke, as if she was trying to convince herself more than me. I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed my hand on the table and shouted, "Elena! You are so blind that you can't see how much your own daughter is suffering." The bang echoed in the room, making it tremble. The air became so thick it was hard to breathe. The only sound was Alma's muffled sobbing, a small, sharp sound like a plea for help. I hugged her tightly, looking directly into Elena's eyes. I felt an immense fury, but also a deep pain. Elena, my daughter, whom I raised and loved all my life, she was now choosing to believe a man instead of her own flesh and blood. "Listen to me, Elena," I said in a low but firm voice. "This isn't made up. It's the truth. It's Alma's pain, and if you don't believe her, then I will protect her myself." I squeezed Alma's hand, feeling its weak warmth, a reminder that I couldn't leave her alone for a second longer. The kitchen in Elena's house felt heavy, as if the air had become dense. After the argument, Elena stood with her arms crossed, her face red, and her breathing ragged, as if she were fighting to contain her rage or her own confusion. I remained seated next to Alma, gently patting her back, feeling her little body still trembling under my hand. Alma's sobs were like a series of stabs to my heart, filling me with pain and fury. I took a deep breath, looked at Alma's swollen eyes, and asked her as gently as I could, "Tell me the truth, my love. Where did you get that recorder?" I needed to know, not because I doubted her, but to understand everything, to be sure I had the whole truth in my hands. Alma hesitated. Her little hands fidgeted with her backpack strap, her head still bowed. Suddenly, she started crying harder. Her sobs echoed in the silent kitchen, as if they were breaking everything. "Grandma," she sobbed, her voice choked. "A few weeks ago, when I saw my dad, I was crying. I only dared to tell him that my stepfather punished me a lot, that I was scared of him. My dad didn't ask anything else. He just gave me this little thing. He told me that if I ever felt in danger, to press the red button." Alma's words hit me like a hammer. I froze, still holding her, my head spinning. Diego, the father who had left, who had suffered so much to protect them, was the one who had given his daughter the tool to defend herself. I felt a mix of pain and gratitude. Diego, even though he was no longer with them, was still finding a way to protect his daughter. But before I could say anything, Elena interrupted me in a harsh voice, as if she wanted to let out all her rage. "There it is. It was Diego who taught her to make everything up. He wants to destroy this family." Elena's eyes were shining with fury, and she pointed at Alma, as if she were the one to blame for everything. Alma, scared, clung to my blouse and shook her head desperately. "No! My dad didn't tell me to make anything up," she cried, her voice hoarse from crying. "I just recorded it. I didn't want my stepfather to do that anymore. I was so scared, Grandma." That grandma was a plea that made it impossible for me to hold back my tears. I hugged her tighter, feeling her little body shake in my arms. "Don't be scared, Alma," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Your grandma believes you. I won't let anyone hurt you again." I turned toward Elena, and the rage inside me exploded like a wildfire. "Elena, don't you hear what the machine recorded?" I almost shouted, pointing at the small recorder on the table. "The girl is crying. What child can act so well? Do you think Alma, a 10-year-old girl, would make up something so horrible just to hurt Hector?" My voice broke, not from weakness, but from the fury and pain that were tearing me apart inside. I couldn't believe that Elena, my own daughter, would choose to side with a man instead of her own flesh and blood. Elena clung to the edge of the table, her nails dug into the wood so hard I heard the sound. She looked at Alma, her eyes wavered, but her mouth remained stubborn. "No, it's all Diego's fault. He must have taught her to say all that." Her voice trembled as if she were trying to convince herself more than me. I shook my head, incredulous at her blindness. "Elena, you are deceiving yourself," I said in a low but sharp voice. "Don't you see the pain on her face? Don't you hear her crying on the recording? That's not acting, it's the truth." Alma couldn't take it anymore. She jumped up and screamed in desperation, her voice hoarse. "You never believe me! I told you so many times, but you only believe my stepfather. You never believed me!" Her words were like a knife, not just for Elena, but for me too. The girl was trembling from head to toe, tears streaming down her face, and suddenly she collapsed into my arms as if all her strength had left her. I panicked. I held her and shook her gently. "Alma, my love, wake up!" My heart was pounding 1,000 miles an hour. Fear rose in my throat as if it would choke me. Elena stood frozen, her hands trembling, and she took a few steps back as if she had been slapped. She looked at Alma, then at me, her eyes red but still stubborn. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice lost. But I no longer had the patience to listen. "You didn't know?" I screamed, my voice echoing in the kitchen. "You didn't know your daughter was suffering? You chose to believe Hector. You chose your pride instead of listening to Alma's plea." I hugged her tightly, feeling her weak breathing, and my heart broke completely. I laid Alma on the sofa. I grabbed a damp cloth to wipe her face and looked for an old bottle of rubbing alcohol in my purse to rub on her temples. The strong smell spread, and I just hoped it would help her come to. A moment later, her eyelids fluttered, then opened, but her gaze was still scared, as if the nightmare wouldn't let her go. "Grandma," she whispered in a weak voice, clinging to my blouse. I hugged her and tried to sound gentle. "I'm here, my love. Don't be scared." I turned to Elena, my daughter, who was standing there pale, with her hands trembling. "If you're not going to protect Alma, I will," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You no longer deserve to be her mother." My words were like a knife, sharp and merciless. I didn't want to hurt Elena, but seeing Alma trembling in my arms, I couldn't forgive her blindness. Elena recoiled, her eyes full of tears, but still stubborn. "Mom, don't say that. It's just that I didn't want to look bad. I didn't want people to talk." Her voice broke as if she were begging me to understand. I interrupted her with a voice as hard as steel. "Look bad? Your pride is not more important than your daughter's life and honor." I pointed at Alma with a trembling hand. "The girl begged you. She told you so many times. But you chose to believe Hector. You chose the appearance of happiness instead of your own flesh and blood." I almost screamed, no longer able to hold back. Elena stood there, her shoulders slumped, but I no longer had the patience to comfort her. I had already lost David. I had already lost my family's happiness. I couldn't allow Alma to suffer for another second. Without hesitation, I took out my phone and dialed Diego's number. His voice sounded on the other end, worried. "Mom, what happened? Why are you calling so suddenly?" I took a deep breath, trying to calm my voice. "Come to Elena's house right now. It's something very serious. It has to do with Alma." I didn't say more. I hung up, feeling a fire in my chest. Diego, even though he had been distant, was still the girl's father. I knew he wouldn't hesitate to come when he learned his daughter was in danger. Less than 2 hours later, Diego appeared at the door. He was thinner than the last time I saw him, his hair a mess, but his gaze was firm, as if he were ready to face anything. He was holding a folder under his arm, but what struck me most was his expression of contained distress, as if he already sensed something terrible. As soon as Elena saw Diego, she became enraged and yelled, "What are you doing here? This is none of your business anymore!" She stood in front of him as if to protect her territory. Diego stood firm, looking directly into her eyes and said, emphasizing each word, "Alma is my daughter, and I have the right to protect her. I made the mistake of letting go once, but I will never ignore her when she's in trouble." His words sounded like a declaration of war, not against Elena, but against everything that had hurt Alma. I saw that his eyes were red, not from weakness, but from the rage and pain of a father. Alma burst into tears. She broke free from my arms and ran to hug Diego, burying her face in his chest and saying between sobs, "I want to go with you, Dad. I don't want to go back to this house. I hate my mom. I hate my stepfather." The girls crying filled the room, breaking the air. Diego hugged her tightly, stroking her hair, and said in a broken voice, "I'm right here, Alma. I'm not going to let you be scared anymore." I stood there, tears streaming down my face, feeling a small comfort in seeing that Alma had found a refuge. But at the same time, it hurt to see my family breaking apart once more. Diego looked up at me, confused. I didn't say anything. I just silently took the recorder and pressed the play button. Hector's voice echoed, cold and terrifying. Every word was like a knife. Diego's face quickly changed from confusion to horror and finally to fury. When the recording ended, he jumped up, his fists clenched, and turned to Elena, yelling so loudly it seemed like he was going to break something. "I may have failed, Elena, but I never turned my back on Alma. You, on the other hand, left her in the hands of a monster." Diego's words were sharp, like a direct slap to Elena's face. Alma let go of Diego and stood there, her eyes red, staring at her mother. Her voice trembled, but it was full of resentment. "Mom, I put up with it for a long time. It wasn't once or twice. It was so many times when you weren't here. When it was just him and me. I was so scared. I told you. I begged you to believe me. But you only scolded me and said I was making things up because I hated my stepfather. Every time you did that, I felt like nobody cared." Alma's words were like a flood that washed everything away. I wrapped my arms around her. Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't contain the pain. Diego squeezed her hand. His eyes were also red, as if he were holding himself back from going out and finding Hector. At that very moment, Elena was trembling. Tears fell endlessly. Her face was pale. She looked at Alma, then at me, and stammered, "No, it can't be. I'm a bad mother." Her voice broke, as if the truth had finally overcome her blindness. I stood in front of her, looked her in the eye, and said firmly, "You chose to believe a man instead of your own daughter. That is the worst sin. If you don't stand with Alma today, then from now on, you are no longer my daughter." My words were like an axe, merciless, but I didn't regret them. I had already lost too much, and I couldn't allow Alma to suffer for another second. Elena burst into tears, falling to the floor, covering her face with her hands. "Mom, forgive me. I didn't know," she sobbed. But I just stood there, holding Alma, my heart heavy. Diego picked up Alma and whispered something in her ear while I watched, knowing that the truth could no longer be denied. The room felt frozen. Only Elena's crying, Diego's whispering, and the painful throb of my heart could be heard. I got up and said in a firm voice, "We have to take Alma to the hospital right now. She needs to be checked out." Diego nodded and immediately carried Alma. His gaze was full of determination. Elena, pale, just followed us in silence, like a shadow full of regret. The taxi ride to the hospital seemed endless. Alma was curled up against Diego, her eyes closed and her hands clutching his shirt. I was next to her, trying to stay calm, but my heart was in my throat. Elena was in the front seat, silent, her hands tightly clasped and her gaze lost out the window. Nobody said anything, but the atmosphere was so heavy, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I just wanted to hug Alma, to tell her everything would be okay, but I knew that words of comfort were no longer enough to heal the pain she had endured. In the pediatric emergency room, a young doctor met us. He had a kind face and spoke in a gentle but professional voice. "How is the little one?" he asked, taking notes and looking at Alma. The girl hid behind Diego, not daring to look around, as if she was afraid anyone might touch her. I sat next to her. I patted her back and whispered, "Grandma's here, Alma. Don't be scared." But every time I saw her frightened eyes, my heart shrank. I saw Diego clench his fists, as if he were holding back his rage. After a while, The doctor called Diego and me into the hallway. Elena remained seated, covering her face with her shoulders, trembling. "The girl shows signs of having been physically assaulted," the doctor said in a grave voice. "Furthermore, she is in a state of severe psychological crisis. She will need long-term treatment, both physical and mental." His words were like a knife, confirming my worst fear. I felt my legs give out, but Diego held me up. His eyes were red, but his gaze was firm. "Thank you, doctor," he said, his voice choked. "We will do everything necessary to help her." When we returned to the room, Elena jumped up and burst into tears. "Oh my God," she murmured, as if the truth had finally crushed her blindness. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, feeling a mix of rage and pity. The doctor asked us more about what had happened, and without hesitation, I took out the recorder and gave it to him. "Listen to this," I said, my voice trembling. When Hector's voice echoed, cold and terrifying, the doctor frowned and started writing faster. When the recording was over, he looked at us and said seriously, "This is very serious. I suggest you contact the authorities immediately." We didn't think twice and went to the police station near the hospital. The atmosphere at the precinct was serious. It smelled of old coffee and papers. A female officer took Alma to a private room with a social worker to calm her down and talk to her. Alma squeezed my hand before she left. Her eyes begged me not to leave her. "I'll be right here, Alma," I said, forcing a smile. "You don't have to be scared anymore." But when the door closed, I felt my heart clench. Diego, Elena, and I gave our statements one by one. I told them everything, from Alma arriving with red eyes to the horrible recording. Diego, his voice full of fury, added how he had given Alma the recorder to protect herself. Elena sat in silence, only nodding when they asked her questions, while tears fell silently. When they played the recording in the evidence room, the officers looked at each other grimly. A commander, a tall, burly man, nodded. "We will act immediately. This man is too dangerous. He can't be on the street for another day." His words were a ray of hope, but also sent shivers down my spine. Hector, the man I had trusted, was now a danger I couldn't have foreseen. Hearing that, Elena collapsed into the chair, covering her face and whispering, "Oh my God, how blind I was." She cried, but I no longer had the strength to comfort her. I only wanted Alma to be safe, to heal. The police planned to arrest Hector that same night as soon as he returned from his business trip. They also put a patrol car outside Elena's house in case he showed up late at night. We returned to my house. Alma fell asleep on the sofa, her forehead still beaded with cold sweat. I put a blanket over her and sat beside her with my eyes red. Seeing her there, so small and fragile, I couldn't hold back the tears. "You didn't deserve to go through this," I whispered, stroking her hair. Diego was sitting in a corner, his eyes fixed on Alma, as if he was afraid she would disappear if he stopped looking at her. Elena went to the kitchen in silence to wash the dishes, but I knew she wasn't focused. Her face was a portrait of sadness, and her hands trembled as she held the plates. Finally, she turned to me and said in a low voice, "Mom, forgive me. I didn't believe Alma." I looked at her, my heart heavy. I wanted to hug her, to tell her I understood, but I couldn't. "You have to apologize to Alma, not me," I replied in a harsh voice that didn't hide my pain. Elena lowered her head, and her tears fell to the floor. I knew she was repentant, but I also knew that the wound in Alma's heart wouldn't be easy to heal. Around 11 p.m., my phone rang. A grave male voice was on the other end, brief but clear. "Mrs. Rodriguez, we have detained Hector at the airport." I let out a breath, but my heart was still pounding, as if I had just woken up from a nightmare. I hung up and looked at Alma, who was sleeping deeply on the sofa. Her face still had a trace of cold sweat. I tucked her in well. I sat beside her and felt a mix of relief and heaviness. Justice was on its way, but the wounds in Alma's soul would need much more than a verdict to heal. The next morning, the news about Hector spread like wildfire on the morning news. They showed a picture of him in handcuffs, his head bowed and his hair a mess, with no trace of the polite appearance I knew. Social media exploded with posts of outrage and comments demanding justice for Alma. The newspapers called him the demon in a suit, and every word was like a stab to the trust I had once placed in him. I sat in front of the television with my fists clenched, feeling a mix of satisfaction and pain. Satisfaction because Hector couldn't escape, but pain for all that Alma had had to suffer. The day of the first trial arrived like a whirlwind. I sat in the front row and felt my heart shrink when I saw Hector enter in an orange prison jumpsuit, disheveled and with his head down, as if he wanted to hide from all eyes. The man I once thought would be a refuge for Elena was now just a guilty shadow. Elena was sitting next to me, not daring to look up, her hands clasped and tears falling silently. I didn't look at her, not out of anger, but because I didn't want my emotions to weaken me. Today was for Alma, and I had to be strong. Fortunately, Alma was allowed not to face him directly. Instead, the recording and the doctor's report were presented in court. When Hector's voice echoed in the cold courtroom, everyone was stunned. I heard the murmuring of the people, the sighs of outrage. The doctor's report with the details about Alma's physical and psychological state made me bite my lip to keep from crying. Elena couldn't hold back and burst into sobs, but I just squeezed her hand without saying anything. I knew Elena was paying the price for her blindness, but this was not the time for reproaches. When the verdict was read, a very harsh sentence, the entire courtroom applauded. Hector was found guilty, and I knew that justice had been served. But when he was being taken out of the courthouse, the crowd outside threw eggs, rotten vegetables, and even garbage at him. They yelled at him with voices full of hate. "Pay for what you did, you demon!" I stood there watching the scene with a mix of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because Hector was getting what he deserved, but sadness because none of it would erase the dark days Alma had lived through. Elena became the center of criticism after the trial. The newspapers called her the blind mother. Neighbors whispered and even avoided her on the street. Once I heard Mrs. Rose, my lifelong neighbor, whisper to someone else, "How is it possible for a mother not to believe her daughter and let her suffer like that?" I wanted to defend Elena, to say that she too had been a victim of her own blindness, but I couldn't. Elena accepted everything in silence, as if it were the price she had to pay. "Mom, I deserve this," she told me once, her voice full of regret. I just nodded without answering, because I knew that only time and her actions could fix her mistake. Alma moved in to live with me. My little house, which had felt so empty since David passed away, was now filled with her voice again. I tried to create a safe space for her, a place where she could laugh without fear. Soon after, a psychologist contacted me, offering to help Alma for free, moved by her story. "The girl needs to heal," she told me in a warm voice. I accepted immediately, grateful that there were still good people willing to help. Little by little, Alma began to open up. She went back to school, and I saw her smile return, though it was still fragile. Her teachers and classmates were wonderful. They encouraged her, gave her paper flowers they had made themselves with simple messages like, "Alma, you are so strong," or "Keep going, we're here with you." Every time Alma came home with one of those flowers, I saw her eyes light up, as if little rays of sunshine were seeping into her heart. Diego, after paying off all his debts, came to visit Alma frequently. He would take her to the park. We would cook simple meals together, full of laughter. Alma clung to her dad like she used to, excitedly telling him things about school, her new teacher, or the boy who sat next to her. Seeing them together, my soul felt at peace, as if a piece of the happiness from before was returning. Diego had also changed. He was no longer the quiet and remorseful man he had once been. "Mom, I'm not going to let Alma suffer ever again," he told me once in a firm voice. I nodded, knowing he was trying to make up for the mistakes of the past. Elena, who now lived alone, went to work in silence, and on weekends she would come to visit Alma. She learned to be patient. She wasn't as stubborn as she used to be, but Alma was still reserved, and there was still a distance in her eyes when she saw her mother. Once, Elena brought her a cake, her favorite, and said shyly, "I made this for you. Do you want to try it?" Alma nodded, but she didn't smile. She just took a piece and ate slowly. I knew the wound in her heart wouldn't be easy to heal, but at least I saw that she no longer avoided her mother completely. One afternoon, I was sitting on the patio watching Alma run after some birds, and her crystal-clear laughter sounded like little bells in the sunset. I felt an immense peace, but I also reminded myself, only when we believe in a child's voice can we truly save them from the darkness. I was about to lose Alma, about to let her sink into a pain that no one was listening to. But now, seeing her laugh, I knew I had kept the promise I made to her, to David, and to myself. Although the road ahead was long, I would always be here to protect Alma, so she could find the light in her life again. I have gone through everything, from pain to fury. And now that I look back, I just want to say one thing to everyone. Never underestimate a child's voice. Their fear, their tears, and their pleas are never fabrications to bother adults. I saw my own granddaughter collapse from pain due to the blindness and selfishness of the people who were supposed to protect her. But in the end, justice came. That demon disguised as a stepfather had to pay a high price before the law, and my daughter will have to live the rest of her life with regret. The message I want to leave with this story is this. True love is not about protecting pride or reputation, but about protecting the safety and dignity of our loved ones, especially children. And for those with an evil heart like Hector's, the only end they deserve is the severe punishment of society and the eternal contempt of everyone. The story you have just heard has been altered in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We are not telling this to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and stops to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I truly wonder, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you choose to be silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. God always blesses, and I'm convinced that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.